We're going to start off with my friend Todd Archer, who has covered the Cowboys for 1,000 years. I do
That'll be
believe
one.
he predated Tex Schramm, Tom Landry, and Gil Brandt. But we are going to get into that. But Todd, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, you got it, Peter. I don't think I've ever bat lead off again with Patrick Mahomes hitting behind me in the lineup. So I'm looking forward to this.
Well, look, you always were a good leadoff guy.
Yeah.
I know that. But so anyway, thanks a lot. Yeah, Mahomes. When I saw Mahomes last week, there were 900 things I wanted to talk to him about. He's always really good about almost anything. I got to 6 of the things, and I looked down at my list, and I said, "Well, I'll have to live to fight another day." So anyway, Todd. So let's start with the news of the Dallas Cowboys. First, that Zack Martin, the All-Pro guard, is back in the fold. Is on his way back to Oxnard, California. You are out in California right now at training camp. Tell me what built the bridge to get Zack Martin back in the fold.
Money, right? I mean, that's the easy answer. He didn't like being the eighth or ninth highest paid guard, and now he's third. Going to get about a little north of $18 million a year these next 2 years, behind Chris Lindstrom, behind Quentin Nelson. So I do wonder, Peter, if the Cowboys saw their preseason game against Jacksonville after seeing their practices in Oxnard and said, we got to settle this offensive line thing. We got to get number 70 back in the building. And as far as the way it was explained to me, some direct conversations between Jerry Jones and Zack Martin helped bridge the gap a little bit. And now he's getting a little bit of a raise for the next 2 years. The Cowboys will still be okay cap-wise when the other guys they got to sign. And their offensive line all of a sudden looks a lot better than it did against the Jaguars on Saturday night.
So this, for some reason, at the beginning of training camp, appeared to really rankle Jerry Jones a little bit. And I couldn't quite figure that out. If you have the guy who's the best or second best guy at his position in football, and he's still playing well, he's not a broken down old man.
Right.
And don't you know that you're probably going to have to pay him if he slips that low beneath it? But Jerry almost took it personally. Why was he a little bit incendiary early in this process?
Trying to interpret Jerry for as long as I've covered this team is always a difficult thing to do. But I think he's trying to maintain cap responsibility. And the first couple of times that they went back and forth, what was asked for and where they've ended up are kind of, it's obviously a middle road, but they didn't want to go down the road of extending Zack, who's going to turn 33 in November, and have him in his extension years on his contract, 35, 36, when he may no longer be playing or maybe not the player that he was. So now the next 2 years that they got him, they've locked him up. But I came back to this in 2001, actually, before I covered the Cowboys paid Larry Allen, made him the second highest paid offensive lineman in football when he had 2 years left on his deal. I don't know why there was reluctance to do it with Zack Martin, because we've not seen slippage. He was an all-pro last year. You see him get the 99 on the Madden rating. Not that that factors into contract talks, I know, but players across the league think so highly of him. It seemed to make too much sense to get something done. And 21 days later, he's here at training. He'll be here at training camp. And the interesting part, I think owes about $1 million in fines for missing all that time.
Wow. Those fines have to be paid, don't they?
Right. They can no longer be waived or rescinded by the team under the CBA. So I wonder if how that north of $18 million a year factored in the $1 million in fines that he was receiving too.
You know what I found over the years, Todd, that I bet when you read all the fine print of this extension, there will be $1 million that will be pretty easy to be earned in incentives, or something. There will be something like that, or 500 or 750. That'll be a piece of cake as a sort of olive branch by the team. it's bizarre that in a case like this, a team often ends up sticking something like that in a contract to make it easier for a guy to pay a fine. Let's get to the other bit of news, and that's Ezekiel Elliott late on Monday afternoon as we record this, tweeting out that, or Xing out, whatever we call that now, that he is signed with the New England Patriots. You know, it sort of seemed obvious all along that that could be a marriage. What did you see? What do you hear?
Well, to me, from the Cowboys' perspective, and you look at what their backup running back situation is, that's why no one could ever really say, oh, there's no way Zeke is going back to the Cowboys. And Jerry kept that door open, even though that, I don't know if anybody else in your organization was, but if Jerry wanted it, it would have happened eventually. But I think for Zeke, he's not what he was, right? I think that has been pretty clear the last few years. But he's still an effective running back. He had 12 touchdowns last year. Still good in short yardage. Still good in goal line. Still good, a very good pass protector. And you look at the Patriots and what they have. A lot of teams can use those sort of backs, and I think Belichick, as you know better than anybody, knows how to use this guy. Now, he's not Corey Dillon coming there in the mid-2000s with Brady. He's probably more Otis Anderson in the Giants, maybe?
That is a great comparison. Great.
It might be in that vein where they're looking at what Zeke can do because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, I don't think as great as Otis was, I don't think he was counted on right away. Was Joe Morris still around?
Yes.
Those years are so. Yeah. If you want Zeke for short bursts, he's still an effective back. If you're looking for him for 20 carries a game, he's no longer that guy.
The only thing that worries me about Ezekiel Elliott, and the reason why I'll be interested to see what the Patriots paid him, probably not very much, but with a big incentive package, I'm sure. But here's a guy who, over his last 3 years, has averaged 4 yards a carry, and last year slipped to 3.8. And as I sort of look at him, the reason why I probably would have done this if I were the Patriots is that he's only 28 years old, and he has not carried the ball more than 250 times in any of the last 3 years. So theoretically, you would think a guy who's averaged whatever, I'm guessing 14 or 15 carries a game, pretty conservative workload, that he probably has some tread left on the tire.
Yeah.
And, when I look at Ezekiel Elliott, I think as long as he has it in his head that this is a job share, and who knows, Belichick did have Corey Dillon be a really big mail carrier for a little while in New England. And, maybe Belichick sees that again, but this is a guy who really hasn't carried the ball all, he hasn't been a workhorse lately. The one thing that I would say, and the reason why I think it's a really good place for Ezekiel Elliott, is that I don't think Belichick trusts the quarterback altogether. And there really isn't anybody there who Belichick thinks is anywhere near an every down back. So I think it's a good spot for Elliott.
And again, not that you're paying running backs to be pass protectors, but that offensive line has some issues up in New England. And if you're looking for an extra time, Zeke is very good at that. He's always been very good at that. I believe Urban Meyer told Jason Garrett he's the best player I've ever had without the ball in his hands in terms of all the other things that he can do. So that could be an element of why the Patriots wanted to go after him. And I do think, again, from the Cowboys' perspective, in 2004, they signed Eddie George out of Tennessee after a great run there. And Bill wanted him around to help with Julius Jones. And maybe there's something that Zeke can help there because he was certainly gracious with Tony Pollard, and he can be gracious with Stevenson and help those guys, their younger backs as well.
When you look at the Patriots, I would say their depth chart at running back has got to be bottom 5 in the league. Ramondre Stevenson, a nice back. Ty Montgomery, absolutely a space filler. And they have an interesting guy. I forget, he's from South Dakota or South Dakota State, named Pierre Strong. He was a mid-round pick last year, and he had a really good training camp for them. So I don't know if he's going to make the team or not, but I think those are their three guys who would be sort of in competition to make the best competition to make the roster right now. Certainly Stevenson will. But this is a good spot for Ezekiel Elliott. And I think that, look, he had a very interesting Dallas career because he was great for 3 years, let's say, maybe 4. And then he was an effective player, for, say, 3 more. But the way I looked at it in the last 2 years, and I started writing this, Todd, mid-2021, the best running back on that team was Tony Pollard. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a good idea and smart that the Cowboys, even though Pollard is not the kind of workhorse back, he's got to be a part of a tandem. I think it's good that they basically kind of chose him in his prime over Ezekiel Elliott at 28.
Absolutely. And they gave him the franchise tag. And it's interesting you say the tandem part because he had 193 carries last year, by far the most he's ever had. I don't know how many more than that he can go. Certainly not 300 like Zeke had early in his career. But if you get up to 250, are you maxing him out too much? And that's an issue for the Cowboys behind Tony Pollard. Right now, it's Rico Dowdle, Malik Davis, and Deuce Vaughn, who looked really good in the preseason game against Jacksonville. But Cowboys history, it's really been one back and then another guy kind of fills in here a little bit, going back to the Emmett days, maybe a little bit of the Dorsett days. But you got to go back to 2009, 2010 when the Cowboys had Felix Jones, Marion Barber, Tashard Choice as a pretty good running back trio. I think that's how they're going to approach this running game.
Yeah.
With Tony Pollard certainly being the bell cow, right? But not in that upper echelon of carries. He might have the upper echelon of production, but I think you're going to see them use multiple backs, and that's really not been something that they've done here in quite a while.
Yeah. So I got 5 one-question topics for you to round out our little conversation here today. Todd Archer with ESPN.
Rapid fire?
Kind of rapid fire, maybe a minute each. That would be fun. I want to ask you and look, I'm an Ohio Bobcat. Nathan Rourke is an Ohio Bobcat. But did anybody on the Cowboys after the game, the preseason game the other night, say, holy crap, how in the world did that guy evade 4 sacks and make that touchdown pass? Was anybody kind of incredulous about it?
We were in the press box. It was one of those. I immediately said that's a SportsCenter top 10, and it turned out to be the play of the night. But it is, the 4 guys that had their arms wrapped around them. If any of those guys have to make a play for the Cowboys this season on that defense, then that defense is not what we thought it was going to be. However, as impressive as it was, but I was unable to actually ask any coaches after the game what they thought of it. But I just know, look, was it certainly in significance, the Eli spin away from the Patriots, throw it up to what's his name there in the undefeated Super Bowl. That play was as great. Yeah. That play was much more significant, but this play had a little bit of that in it because he should have been sacked 3 different times.
Yeah, that was just amazing. I want to ask you about Dak Prescott. So who doesn't love Dak Prescott? One of the best human beings. This is my 40th year covering the game. One of the best human beings I've met in this game. Utterly fantastic. His acceptance for NFL Man of the Year last year was the best one of those speeches I've ever seen. And on a different note, I'm just telling you, his mother, I bet, would be incredibly proud of the person that Dak Prescott has become. Okay, having said that, I really want to see Dak Prescott lift this team. I want to see him.
So does Jerry.
I want to see him play great when really great is required. And again, look, I'm not saying that anyone in the playoff game at San Francisco last year, I'm not saying anyone is beating the 49ers defense in San Francisco. But I would like to see him play better in the huge games. Tell me what the feeling is around the organization about Dak's readiness at some point to take the next step.
Well, it has to be this year or next, and maybe it's just this year, although there are cap implications that make it difficult for them to move on from him in 2025. But there's two things about carrying the team a little bit. That's never been his MO, right? They asked him to do that in 2018. It didn't happen until they got Amari Cooper in a trade. They asked him to do it last year. It didn't happen for a variety of reasons. He had some interceptions. But what have they done? Well, now Mike McCarthy is the play caller, as we all know. And one thing Mike McCarthy quarterbacks don't do is they don't turn it over. And you can say, well, Aaron Rodgers has never done that. Fine. Mike should get some of that credit. But Brett Favre, I believe in 2005, led the NFL in interceptions. His first year with Mike, he cut him in half, going from like 35 to 17. Still too many interceptions, but a pretty substantial cutback in the interceptions that Favre had. Aaron Brooks led the NFL with Mike McCarthy as his coordinator in New Orleans in interception percentage. So the Cowboys believe that a Mike McCarthy controlled offense will lend itself to Dak cutting out these interceptions. And I also point out that's never really been an issue for Dak until last year. So I think we've made too much of the interception talk and where he is. But another guy, Peter, that I think is going to be a huge influence on this offense and on Dak Prescott is Brandon Cooks. He's been terrific here in training camp. You add him to Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, another ascending player. You have Pollard. Now you have Zack Martin back in that offensive line. They like their young tight ends. That they have an offense that Dak will have to make some guys better, but not the entire unit, if that makes sense. And then if the Cowboys can get to an NFC championship game for the first time since 1995, then maybe they'd feel better about extending that contract beyond 2024.
What will be the biggest difference we will notice in the play calling going from Kellen Moore to Mike McCarthy?
I think the ball will get out quicker. The West Coast principles, philosophies, 3 steps, 5 steps. And with Kellen Moore, the Zampese offense that the Cowboys ran for years under Jason Garrett, Scott Linehan before that or after that, and before Kellen was more. I don't have a good way to describe it, but it wasn't as timing based as what Mike wants, and that should help Dak A cut back on the interceptions, and B he's got receivers that can win on the outside or even Lamb on inside that he can get rid of the ball quickly. I think that'll be something that'll be different. And will help that offensive line in terms of its pass protection because last year was in the bottom third in terms of pass block win rates.
How did Jerry and McCarthy work together?
Very well. And some of that is, I think Mike has now figured out the Cowboy way and doesn't let the small stuff get to him.
Maybe the way Bill Parcells figured it out.
Right. It's, Bill had the sign on his desk, just coach the bleeping team. I don't know if Mike has something like that on his desk, but I think after that first year, which wasn't in a pandemic when it really wasn't the full Jerry, because it wasn't, we couldn't talk to Jerry after games and things like that. I think he realized, I think the phrase he came up with was, I'm just worried about things that affect winning. And some of the stuff that happens with this franchise, maybe a lot of this stuff that happens with this franchise, doesn't really affect winning unless you let it, with all the attention that they get from the outside that can maybe impact the narrative more than the actual truth.
Okay. I think the most intriguing player on this team this year, you'll be surprised when I say it, is Stephon Gilmore. And I'll tell you why. It was only 4 years ago that Stephon Gilmore was named the Defensive Player of the Year. he had some great games in Indianapolis for a team that was a total sinking ship. When he's healthy, I think easily he's a top 10 corner in the NFL. So, what have you seen in Gilmore this year? What do you think of a tandem at corner for the Cowboys of Trevon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore?
Right. You might have two guys that play the same position but do it completely differently with the way Diggs plays, gambling.
Yeah.
I don't want to say guessing, but some people might say he guesses a little too much. And with Gilmore, a technician and how he goes about it. It's interesting. I asked McCarthy about older cornerbacks and how he knows that they still have it. And he mentioned Charles Woodson that he had in Green Bay late in Charles' career before he moved to safety. And he said, you can tell right away how their mind works and how that gets them by any sort of physical limitations that they don't have anymore. And Gilmore shown in these practices, Michael Gallup said, I'm running a route and he's talking to me, tell me where I'm going. So that's how smart this guy is, that he can impact the receivers and what they're thinking and what they need, how they need to adjust their splits and things, and the impact that he's had on the defense with Trevon Diggs. Diggs had a funny story after he signed his extension. He's like, I'm eating some gummy bears, and still Gilmore just shakes his head. You say, well, you can't be eating that stuff. So now Diggs isn't eating any of that stuff. He's getting up early in the morning, getting a workout in with Gilmore. And maybe that's the Patriot way rubbing off on the Cowboys a little bit with Cooks on the offensive side of the ball too, having played in New England. And that's probably something that this team needed, that there's always been a lot of cart before the horse when it comes to this team. Maybe these guys are starting to let the other guys know that there's other things you have to do before you think you're ready to play in a Super Bowl.
So my last question is about the Philadelphia Eagles. I might be wrong about this. You're going to know this a little bit better than I, but there's something like 4-1 against them in their last 5 games. I read that somewhere. Maybe that's right, wrong. It's close.
The Cowboys. You're saying
Cowboys,
the Cowboys,
right?
right? Yeah, Dak's NFC East record is ridiculous. I don't have it off the top of my head, but he's beat the Giants like 10 straight times. He's beat Washington a bunch. Yeah. They've had success against Philly too.
So why do you think, particularly with the Philly defense having really risen? I mean, I'm looking at the Philly defense last year, and, the Cowboys put up 57 points on them in 2 games last year, played them very well the year before. So the Cowboys must feel good about their ability to compete with the Eagles this year.
Absolutely. And you mentioned 57 points, 40 of them in one game when Dak was the quarterback. Cooper Rush started the other game. So, and they lost 27-17, something like that. But they do have confidence. And again, I think a lot of people forget the Cowboys were 12-5 last year with 2 overtime losses that could have gone their way. At Jacksonville, the game-winning touchdown is scored on a pass that gets deflected into a defender's hands, returned for a touchdown. Green Bay, they had that game kind of under control, and then they, again, miscues and mistakes cost them and led them to an overtime situation that they probably shouldn't have been in. So if you take out those 2 games, it's probably maybe a different story in the NFC East and in the NFC, but they don't go into this season with a fear of the Eagles. There's certainly a respect for what the Eagles have done, and they're by far their biggest opponent in this division. Whether the Giants have improved that much or Washington has improved that much, it's still the Eagles and Cowboys in my mind. But I'll come back to this, Peter. There's not been a repeat winner in this division since 03-04 when Andy Reid was coaching the Eagles. To me, that's a whole heck of a lot of history that I don't know if you'd bet against. I'm saying it's going to be the Cowboys. That would be the team that wins this division right now. But until that streak gets broken, I would lean towards somebody other than Philadelphia winning this division simply based on history. And as a Red Sox fan, I know you base a lot of things on history.
But however, the team I root for has won it 4 times in this century. And the team that a lot of America roots for has won it 0 times in this century. So there's that little bit of history to think of too. Todd Archer, listen, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. I'm actually going to see you Saturday night at the in Seattle. I'll be at that preseason game, so I look forward to it.
Sounds great. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.